A very good evening to all of you. Thanks for joining us in refreshing our memory of bell hooks' thoughts and writings, and in sharing our ideas, our feelings, and our emotions in response to bell hooks' work, her presence that's there everywhere, particularly in feminist theory, the way she has taught us to think. So I thought maybe we could begin with her words instead of my introducing her. So I have two short videos where she is speaking. I hope I'll be able to share them with you. I hope I'll be able to present them. I'm trying. I don't know why there is no audio.
Sometimes there is a problem, Suneetha. Even
Yeah.
I am not able to share the window.
Yes. Now let us see.
Capitalist patriarchy, then we never move. Change the scale of evaluation. Because if we continue to judge ourselves by the standards set within that imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, then we never move. Because even if we move, but we still have what I call the voice of judgment. My theory is that the dominating culture depends on the voice of judgment. That even when you're succeeding, you're not good enough. Even
There is
I
ringtone.
think I was a writer, even after I had books published. Because for me, what did I think a writer would be? What would be the magic moment that I could say, I'm a writer? And that whole thing had to do with my needing some type of validation outside myself to give me power, and not to be able to think of, power that I can give myself, that we can self-generate. And I worry, and I talked a little bit, and we're not going to talk about Black Lives Matter tonight, but I was saying, sometimes I worry because so many of our energies of protest and resistance are outer directed. Last night I asked the audience, what if we took away all the police brutality in our society against Black males? Would Black males be self-actualized? Is it really police brutality that is keeping Black males from, I think about, I mentioned my brother last night, how my father used to say to him, Glory, to me, Glory, your brother ain't worth a nickel. And he loved putting my brother down. I mean, it's amazing that my brother could come out of addiction. When I hear people like putting little Black children and boys, especially you stupid, you dumb, down, you think how will that person empower themselves from that? How are we healing from that? And this particular conversation has to do with moving from pain to power. And that's really what we want to discuss about how do we, as people from oppressed and exploited groups, find our way to joy, find our way to emotional well-being, to healing.
Yeah, that is bell hooks, who has taught how to generate power, how to generate powerful ideas, how to take them forward. More power to her, much more power to her. And let us together derive more power from her words. Let me try to introduce as much as I can, because for many of us, she doesn't require an introduction. But let me try my bit. Bell hooks is her pseudonym. She has taken it from her grandmother, who was her inspiration, great grandmother, who was her inspiration. Bell Hooks was born as Gloria Jean Watkins in 1952. One second, please. I also have to admit. And she's a she's a thinker. She's an activist. She's a teacher. She's a feminist who declared her sexual identity as queer past gay. And her PhD dissertation was on Toni Morrison, entitled "Keeping a Hold on Life," reading Toni Morrison's fiction. Her first work, full-length work, was Entire Woman, Black Women in Feminism, which was published in 1981. After that, she has published books. She has published books for children. She has published books on films. She has contributed chapters in edited volumes, all of which were like path breaking and which introduced new ideas, new theories, new tools, like feminist theory from margin to center, published in 1984. Talking Back, Thinking Feminist, Thinking Black, 1989. Black Looks, Race and Representation, 1992. Killing Rage, Ending Racism, 1995. Real to Real, Race, Sex and Class at the Movies, 1996. Remember Rapture, The Writer at Work, 1999. Where We Stand, Class Matters, 2000. Communion, The Female Search for Love, 2002. And the companion books like We Real Cool, Black Men and Masculinity, 2003. The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity and Love, 2004. Writing Beyond Race, Living Theory and Practice in 2012. She has also written her autobiographies like Bone Black, Memories of Girlhood in 1996, Wounds of Passion, A Writing Life, 1997. The most important work for us in this gathering, apart from her other works, of course, on feminist theory, are also her books on teaching. Teaching to transgress. Teaching, using the classroom as a space of change. Like her book, which is titled Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice of Freedom, published in 1994. And the other book is Teaching Community, A Pedagogy of Hope, published in 2003. The third one, again, is Teaching Critical Thinking, Practical Wisdom, published in 2010. Her ideas of masculinities and femininities, the intersectional feminism, particularly her work on Black identities and Black writing, feminist theory, moving from margins to center, particularly Black feminist theory, moving from margins to center, and her idea, the most inspiring idea, concept of oppositional gaze, have been inspiring us at every step and making us look back at our readings, our writings, our studies, and the theories that we are introduced to, and the context that we are familiar with. So we are going to listen more from our colleague, Professor Challapalli Swaruparani, and also from our students of first semester MA. Probably we could begin with Ms. Abhiruchi Chatterjee. Abhiruchi?
Yes, ma'am. I'll go first. Are you saying? Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, should I go ahead?
Yes, please, Abhiruchi. I had muted myself, so it took a while to respond. Please go.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Suneetha, ma'am, for creating this platform to collectively remember Bell Hooks, her being, and celebrate her significant contributions to the feminist discourse. I didn't know how to collate my thoughts for a scholar who embodied the personalist political through her works and so articulately brought out lived experience as a research category, that I felt perhaps that an open letter would best express those thoughts. So here goes. Um, Dear bellhooks, I pray that you rest now, finally. For rest is a difficult feat as a feminist activist, as a woman, and as a woman of color. My classmate Vandana mentioned the other day that it is too unfortunate that we lost you even as we are just getting introduced to your incredible body of work. Although we were introduced to your writings and texts only now, reading them gave us the air of conversing with a pen pal on the other side of the world, physically distant but emotionally intimate. For you write from the heart, you write from experience, and you forefront that experience, that location in theorizing instead of abstracting it. White supremacist capitalist patriarchy gave so many of us the vocabulary to locate our oppressions within the interlocking systems of domination that define our reality, to leverage our lived experience as valuable forms of knowledge. Before I moved to gender studies, my disciplinary training lay in international relations and political science. And as a student and early career scholar in these disciplines, a lingering feeling was that of feeling small and insignificant in front of all the grand theories of the systems and institutions that felt beyond my control and agencies. How could I make a difference? You taught me that the difference I made lay in my very being. Your approach of theory as a liberatory practice made theory accessible to me. Not only that, it provided me the vocabulary to articulate and name my oppressions and locate how I engage with them. It provided a bridge for lived realities of the marginalized, of those eroded to the background, nuts and bolts in the grand machinery, invaluable but invisibilized, to find audiences in knowledge formation and production. In theorizing and visibilizing the experiences of yourself, your community, and your location, you laid the pathway for others to do the same. And for that, we are so grateful. Your journey from growing up in a racially segregated US South to writing as an emancipatory tool to the accomplished author and activist you left the world as illuminates the possibility for joy in healing from pain. Encouraging the conversation to look within, to grant ourselves power as individuals and as communities, to grant ourselves power, happiness, and celebrate our accomplishments while being aware of the way different systems of domination designed to make us feel not enough, inferior, as aspiring to something that we are not. Whether it's the internalized patriarchy, the racism or casteism, it speaks to all of us. My journey as a young woman, feeling engaged, hurting in a, now I know, a neo-colonial, neoliberal patriarchy that operates even as in the supposedly democratic and socialist spaces, towards being towards a woman, one that recognizes the intersections of the various structures, whether it's familial, community, religious, state, capitalist, etc., that made me feel not good enough, less than. No matter my achievement, and the awareness that this brought in impacted the way that I could re-engage and self-determine my worth, my happiness, and heal from the pain in the way that I now engage with the manifestations of these structures in my everyday. One of the outcomes in that journey is understanding the intersecting system. Sorry, just one second. Yeah. One of the outcomes of that journey is understanding the intersecting systems at play, um, in understanding the intersecting systems at play was the need to do so within the framework and not let it be a solitary exercise. And that emancipatory, liberating space for me was found for me, as for you, in the classroom. Entering the gender studies classroom, especially at this university, created a safe space for the diversity of our experiences, like and I also refer to my colleagues and my batchmates, and connected our individual realities and locations to broader frameworks. Thank you for centering democracy, for centering participation and presence in pedagogy rather than the hierarchy in teaching. The other day, we were reading Oppositional Gaze in Deepa ma'am's classroom, and we each brought our new layers to the meaning of the term, from queer, disability, neurodivergent, caste, religion, and so many other perspectives that propounded the meaning of the term. It was possible because each of us was able to put our lens to the term, which would not have been possible in a linear pedagogy that negated our presence. One of my friends, a PhD research scholar who is now discovering the joy of teaching, found the classroom that encourages critical thinking and questioning, found such a classroom as the classroom as a space for subversion and transgression, um, as a space for empowerment for the teacher as well as her students in an increasingly suffocating as she faced an increasingly suffocating discourse in the family and in community spaces that she has to live in, and she finds her power in her capacity as the teacher, her power to transform the way family conversations and community discussions happen. In conclusion, um, In conclusion, you may not be with us today physically, but your words have immortalized you. The flame that your works have sparked in our minds, in the ways that we engage with the everyday, in seeing experience as a critical category, each in our own realities and our locations, will keep your legacy alive. Thank you for making us feel less alone about our oppressions, our agencies, and locations. Thank you for making us feel seen and validated in the face of multiple oppressions that serve to deny our very existence to erasure, and for making us recognize that this is one of the key leverages in negotiating power. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abhiruchi. How I wish I could have written a letter like this. Thank you so much. That was excellent. May I call upon Gurpratap Singh now? Gurpratap?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, Abhiruchi, that was really great. I mean, the literary skill, I'm impressed. And as Sunita ma'am said, like in the beginning, Bell Hook's loss was kind of a like to some it felt like a personal loss, and I guess I'm one of those. I had started reading her work only a few months ago. Like I had come to know her only a few months ago, and then suddenly I hear this news. And I'm going to discuss a book, like I'm going to talk about, not even discuss, but touch upon a book which made me rethink about love, a thing that I believed so strongly within one night, like my entire life, what I'd believed about love. So today I'm going to touch upon the book called All About Love New Vision by Bell Hooks. For a student like me, who is particularly interested in the field of queer and sexuality studies, concepts of love and desire are central to the discourse of my research. When I say the word love, the first image that is invoked in our minds is probably of a couple in a romantic or sexual relationship because we have been raised in a culture where the family's foundation rests on this sexual bond, and this is the image which has been glorified and romanticized by popular media. Owing to my own experiences, I had always found this association with love very problematic, very limiting, and false to some extent. I'd always stood up for the other ways of loving, especially non sexual love. But then I felt there was still something missing, something not right. For example, I often exemplified the bond with my mother, which I cherished so much. Yet, despite the open space within our relationship, despite all the care and affection, the bitter truth remains that my mother would rather deny my queerness than accept it. She may compromise but not accommodate it, and she uses the same argument of love to make me perform the normal stand of masculinity. And then I came across this book by Bell Hooks, which made me realize that while the word love features so much in my discourse, I really do not know what exactly love means. While the question, which, which, l- while the question, which love becomes legitimate, is very important to ask. But we first need to start with the square one, that is, defining love. What does this term mean? Bell Hooks points out that while we use this word so often and so casually, there's hardly any discourse on the word itself, except for maybe in the popular media, which again is not critical, and it only glorifies a particular image conjured in the name of love. The reason I started with my experience, which I will bring in again when needed, is because a similar scenario made bell hooks that love, think about love. This same feeling that there's something wrong with what we call love, or to put it in her words, or how she puts it is in a better ways, there's a lack of love or lovelessness. This is what prompted bell hooks to question the definition of love. Bell Hooks begins by bringing in examples and testimonies on how love is popularly defined, the kind of stuff which even we hear every day, a profound, passionate affection for someone, with obvious implications to a sexual attraction, although we do understand that love is not just about sexual desire. Or stuff like love is this feeling that we know exists in us, but is undefinable. In a way, love is mystified, which I find is very similar to the idea of a mystical, exotic femininity. You'll find a whole range of literature describing the woman as a mysterious creature, like the Pandora's box, for example. Bellux challenges this idea of love being undefinable, mysterious, or an inherent feeling. She quotes from a psychiatrist, Scott Peck, self-help book called The Road Less Traveled, which she was relieved to discover, as it provided a befitting definition of the word love in order to unveil the shroud of mystery and ambiguity associated with love. This is how Pex defines love, and she quotes, the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. The word spiritual here is not synonymous with religion. Bell Hooks later clarifies that it is more about the union of the mind, body, and spirit. That is the idea of a self, which characterizes a living being from the non living, which I feel is so often reduced or neglected in today's discourse in the name of science and the search of factual truth. Ex- uh, Coming back to the quotation, Hooks stresses on the idea of a love which is firstly an act and not a noun. Plus, it's an act of choice, which is made to nurture growth. This is a direct contrast with this idea of an instinct based love. She uses the example of how, in the early stages of a human being, the infant responds to care and affection. The first growth happens due to these acts of love, which, according to Hooks, I quote, are a mix of various ingredients: care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, and trust, as well as honest and open communication. Bellux argues that the lack of such a clear definition and the presence of ideas like love is a feeling end up confusing love with any of these so-called ingredients. So, when we are deeply drawn to someone, we might define that as love, whereas this process is actually called cathexis, a term for it's a term for a process of developing a connection with people by investing your emotions because you feel attracted to them. Similarly, care and affection are two aspects of love which are so often replaced with the word love. Hooks explains, using her own experience with her family of origin, that because we believe in this taken for granted presence of love as a feeling, we end up with this idea of an unquestionable parental love, which most of the times is actually care and affection. This results in us never realizing whether our family spaces are really loving or dysfunctional. And even the culture works against such a realization because it would reveal the family as a site not so personal, a site where power hierarchies function as well. Bell Hooks says that she had to rely on therapy in order to admit this. This also resonated with my own experience, and I got the language to analyze all my relationships and conclude how less I had experienced love truly. Thus, by defining the idea of loving, Hooks uses this as a starting point for her book. She goes on to discuss various aspects of loving, the various stages of loving, and the different relationships we have. As I do not have the time to delve deeper into the vast topic, I would like to touch upon a few points which I feel are very necessary in today's life and the discourse on love. Other day in class, we were talking about this comment that the director of Arjun Reddy and Kabir Singh made, which was on lines of how violence is an important part of the expression of love. While it's true that popular media and culture keep on reiterating this idea time and again, but we must remember that this normalization of violence goes way back into childhood. Hooks discusses both these aspects in detail. Corporal punishment is so common in the Indian context. Remember the tagline of the movie Thappad, "Bas itni si baat." Like a lot, while this was used for the domestic violence against women, we could very much use it for the domestic violence against children in India, where parents often justify violence against children by saying things like, "This is for your own good," or "We feel more pain than you when we hit you." I was very surprised when Bell Hooks writes of these same statements. She uses these same statements and critiques the irony, hypocrisy, and contradiction in the very idea of violence being a form of loving. This book was published in 1999, and we can see that over the years there has been a significant shift in how violence against children has been perceived in the West, and how stronger legal reforms have been introduced there. Whereas it remains widely acceptable and even a part of culture, according to some in India. The normalization of such a violence at an early age and throughout growth by popular media strengthens unequal power hierarchies and normalizes violence. The reason I and my mother do not have a relationship of love is because of the age hierarchy and her status as a mother, which puts her above me and lets her exercise her power or over me without considering my desires, my thoughts. There's a lack of respect over there. The same goes with gender, caste, class, and other hierarchies. It is in this context that Belluk suggests that we need to create a love ethics and incorporate it within our value system. Only then can we realize the healing power of love. While to some, loving as a solution might sound very poetic, Hooks by defining Hooks by defining and exploring the nuances and complexities of the idea of loving confirms that at the heart of social justice and the fields associated with it is the concept of love. In the end, I would like to recommend this book to everyone and urge you all to read it. I'm sure it would make you rethink of how you have defined love. Considering the limits of time and my ability, I have hardly touched upon the topic, but I chose to present this book to introduce it to you, to those who haven't read it, in the hope that this will make you interested in reading it. And that's my homage to Bell Hooks and keeping her alive beyond physical death. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gurpratap. So very thoughtful, like how Bell Hooks lived our lives and how she has given a language for us to express our feelings and experiences. When I chanced upon Bell Hooks for the first time and read Entire Woman, when she asks a question like, we have multiple identities, we have multiple locations. Can't we speak from multiple locations? Why are we constantly asked to choose our location? Why do we stand in a nowhere place? I think it was so inspiring. It was so inspiring. It is almost like finding a register to express yourself, not just to express, but even to think, even to consolidate our thoughts. Thank you so much, Good Pratap, for that touching presentation, moving presentation. May I now request Helene Matthew to speak? She's also from first semester MA, Gender Studies.
Good evening, everyone. There was two great presentations by Abhiriji and Gurpratap. I was also introduced to bell hooks' works only recently, and when I read Oppositional Gaze the other day for class, I felt seen. Without being a black American woman, I could still identify with her theories in ways. Today, I would discuss her essay Choosing the Margin as a Space for Radical Openness. Margin is a term that comes up multiple times in our discourse. It usually refers to the site of the oppressed, dehumanized, devalued community based on race, class, sex, age, etc. It denotes a certain set of powerless people, silenced and restricted by the dominant discourse. We may identify this dominant discourse as the white heterosexual male hegemonic order. We have also seen how Sandra Harding coined the term standpoint theory, or the notion that the perspectives of marginalized or oppressed individuals can help to create more objective accounts of the world. Through the outsider within phenomenon, these individuals are placed in a unique position to point to patterns of behavior that those immersed in the dominant group culture are unable to recognize. Harding's argument was that it is easy for those at the top of social hierarchies to lose sight of real human relations and the true nature of social reality, and thus miss critical questions about the social and natural world, whereas people at the bottom of social hierarchies have a unique standpoint. Although such people are often ignored, their marginalized position actually make it easier for them to identify important research questions and explain social and natural problems. Bell Hooks presents an alternative to this perception of the marginalized in her essay, choosing the margin as a center of radical openness. Instead of occupying a patronizing position or a vantage point from where the marginalized is allowed a voice and a platform for expression, Hooks reverses the conventional order and brings the margin to the center. In a bid to create a counter-hegemonic space, Hooks makes an assertion that the margin is in fact the center. The margin for Hooks does not comprise the sidelined or those pushed to the periphery. Rather, it is a space inhabited by the powerful who have been rendered powerless by the hegemonic patriarchal forces. She asserts, and I quote her: "For me, the space of radical openness is a margin, a profound edge. Locating oneself there is difficult yet necessary. It is not a safe place, one is always at risk, one needs a community of resistance." Hooks doesn't try to bring the edges to the center, and she doesn't try to blur, destroy, or move past them. What she is interested is in finding margins, or finding herself in the margin and immersing herself in it to make it a place to live in, a kind of rough and fraught physical space. She writes about the racist and sexist heritage of society, relying to some extent on the role of the media in this tradition. She advocates the formation of counter-hegemonic cultural practices to define the spaces where we begin the revision process. This way, the margin is not a place one wishes to give up or to surrender as part of moving into the center, but rather, again I quote her, a site one stays in, clings to even, because it nourishes one's capacity to resist. It offers to one the possibility of radical perspective from which to see and create, to imagine alternative new worlds. In other words, the margin becomes a position of strategy, not essence. A person in the margin is outside the definitions imposed by the master discourse. They have the ability both to define themselves and to gain a new perspective on society as a whole. A person in the margin is outside the usual definitions, categories, and binaries of society. They develop and articulate their own subjectivity and identity, their own highly personal sense of the world. For Hooks, it is necessary to find such a space in order to lead a life of resistance. It is the margin in which I come, and I quote her, which I come to voice that space of my theorizing. Hook states that the speech of resistance she voices from her marginal space is aimed at transforming society into a space where there is unlimited access to pleasure and power of knowing. where transformation is possible. She also talks about the shortcomings of language, about how words and languages are built by the oppressor and therefore difficult to use to challenge these systems of power. This reminds us of Audre Lorde's master's tool can't dismantle the master's house. Hook's right. Do I dare to speak to the oppressed and the oppressor in the same voice? It is not an easy task to find ways to incorporate our many voices into the various texts we create in film, poetry, feminist theory. These are sounds and images that mainstream consumers find difficult to understand. When a radical voice speaks of problem and dominance, it tends to speak to those who have the right to dominate. Their presence may be the cause of changes in the nature and direction of our words. Spaces can be real and imagined. Spaces can tell stories and unfold histories. Spaces can be interrupted, appropriated, and transformed through artistic and literary practice. Understanding marginality as a position and place of resistance is crucial for oppressed, exploited, colonized people. If we view the margin as a sign marking despair, a deep nihilism penetrates in a destructive way into the very ground of our being. On a parallel note, I would also like to bring forth some basic ideas she mentions in her book Feminist Theory from Margin to Center. Hooks questions the prevailing feminist discourses during her time by pointing out the absence of a concrete definition of feminism, as well as the movement's majority of white affluent feminists. In her 1984 book, Hooks called to a revolutionary feminist worldview which deploys a pluralistic lens to highlight the absence of oppressed groups and to question cultural representation. No kind of oppression is more deserving of attention than the other. Sexism, racism, class elitism, and imperialism are all manifestations of oppression. As a result, all of them are interconnected and inextricably linked to one another. The belief that these can be separated or they have no influence over one another is incorrect, and this leads to distorted, prejudiced, and misleading conversations about sexism and sexist oppression. Individuals who work for the abolition of sexism without fighting for the abolition of racism, casteism, or classism, as Hooks indicates, undermine their own efforts. Whereas individuals who work for the abolition of racism or classism while still supporting sexist oppression contribute to the cultural foundation of all types of group oppression. While they may successfully initiate reforms, their efforts will not result in revolutionary transformation. Hooks developed a jargon-free prose style that made her work accessible to all her readers. This was necessary because the ideas she articulated were complex, challenging, long-held pieties about the nature of power, social and economic hierarchies, and the role of activism and reform. She rejected the idea that different kinds of injustice existed in isolation from each other and argued that to address one, it is necessary to tackle the others. One aspect of her writing that stood out to me was the repetition of the same lines. Hooks emphasizes her argument by delivering a notion several times. The reader may readily and thoroughly comprehend and relate to her theory. Her own experiences lend credibility to her work. He provides a comprehensive theory of intersectionality by integrating the politics of location, experience, and articulation. By radically deconstructing the notions of marginalization or margin, Hooks provides an alternative that can be emancipatory. Her essay's tone is so compelling that she always leaves a lasting effect on the reader. Another feature that characterizes her work is its continued relevance. She encourages her writers to critically analyze and then transgress established limits while accepting one's own individuality. Although her demise came as a shock, let us continue to read and reflect on her works. Let us not forget Hooks and her invaluable contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Harlin, for that presentation, for that engagement with Bell Hooks' work. Yeah, and Bell Hooks is someone who has not just pushed the margins to the center, but who has created the center in the margins. She has completely relocated the power of writing, the power of theory, the power of thought, and um, that is how she writes. She writes a very insightful essay on straightening our hair. That thought, that perspective, which probably we haven't thought of from an African American woman's perspective, the hair interpreted as an image, as a symbol of the African American woman's identity, and how straightening the hair has a connotation of solidarity, at the same time, a connotation of westernization or whitewashing for that matter. Yeah, thank you so much, Harley. It looks like Professor Swaruparani will not be able to join us. She has some network issues. Probably we could, anyway, this session was also not supposed to be simply presentations and speeches, kind of a session. Maybe all of us, like whoever is interested, could quickly come in and speak on bell hooks or speak on their reading of bell hooks. Could you, for a minute, please turn on your videos? I want to take a picture. Please turn on your videos.
We there?
Yeah. I can see many of you, but not all of you. It would be great if you could turn it on for a minute. Durga, I can see. Deepa, yeah. Katyayani Garu, I can see. Vasanti is here. A few more, maybe. Debumita. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Sorry for compelling you to turn on your video. Uh, please come into discussions. Please participate in the discussions. Now the session is open for discussions. Deepa, would you like to say something since yes, please, Jagdish.
Firstly, ma'am, I would like to thank you and the entire Department of Center for Women's Studies to make it a university level meeting. I am from Department of Philosophy. My question might move away from bell hooks, but it is centered on the basis of women's studies in general. My question is, generally we conventionally think that it is mostly feminine people who generally talk about feminist theories and all, but what are the problems that men face when they talk about feminist theories and stuff? Like, suppose for example, when you take this British philosopher John Stuart Mill, he was a radical feminist, and there are some other men who also are radical feminists. So what kind of problems they face in this patriarchal society when they lead up a feminist stand?
Jagdish, you want an answer? Maybe we could meet sometime later. We could have a session like this where we could discuss who is a feminist, who's a radical feminist, and what does radical feminism mean. That discussion we can have. That I'm not going to address today because I really want us to be remembering bell hooks. So, in her context, I'd like to say feminism actually started focusing on masculinities as well. It brought in an entire area of study called masculinities. And bell hooks went a step further when she talked about black masculinities, not just gender, but about about class, race, the history of slavery, all those aspects she has brought in. I think that is the contribution of feminist theory and Black feminist theory particularly. Gadha.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Uh, I think that was a very insensitive question to begin with. Um, anyway, what I wanted to say was that um, uh, we also, I'm from third semester, and so we also went through oppositional gaze. Donna, can you mute yourself, please? Yeah. So the right to look, the gaze is something I always fall back on a daily basis, um, because I am a gender non-conforming person, and um, this gaze has haunted me throughout my life. And to be able to put it into very strong words, and to be able to uh, bring it out uh, from a place of pain and suffering to a place of academia is something that Bell Hooks has taught me, along with my teachers, of course. Um, so I really wanted to share how uh, a theory uh, uh, that arised from another context actually helped me turn my pain into something more than just pain. Um, yeah, it has empowered me in that sense. I really wanted to remember that, and I will never forget uh, that weapon, if I can call it, mm, that Bell Hooks has given to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Gadha. I join you in saying that bell hooks has given us so many tools to understand ourselves and to understand others, the other as well. Professor Vasanti.
Yeah, in response to that question, one of the things that I um, really liked about reading bell hooks was, especially when you're caught up with these struggles of different identities, and the way in which identity assertions are made to negate the other. And so it was really wonderful for me to read her where she talks about the need for solidarity, and the need for different groups to come together. She wasn't articulating an identity as against another identity, but she was articulating identities in terms of how all of us come together as a community. So that was an idea that really attracted me, which is why when I heard the question, I thought I should respond and say that the idea of solidarities across identities is something that comes through in her work so much. And the kind of compassion that you see there is quite unique, because usually you tend to see theorists as people who are not rooted in emotion. But I think the emotion is something that comes through from her work so much that you can't miss it. And that's why I really wanted to say, in terms of how I have been influenced by her work.
Thank you, Vasanti. Any other observations, please? Any other interventions? Anne?
Yes, I was about to raise my hand. Thank you. Thank you for this platform. Thanks to Center for Women's Studies for actually bringing a lot of women's studies scholars and other scholars in this midst to think about the very important contributions that bell hooks has done. In fact, when I speak about bell hooks in my own classrooms, I can see the look of joy that they've discovered something. I think that is what we all encounter, whatever walk of life we are in. There is a sense of joy when we read bell hooks. It is tough. So I worked on African American women's travel narratives for my PhD with Professor Suneetha Rani. And the way bell hooks spoke, it was revealing, but it was also really tough to deal with because, yes, her language is made or streamlined in such a manner that we can understand her. But when we try to put pen to paper, I have found myself unable to actually articulate what she wants us to take through in our own journeys. So, one important point, so when I was looking at her autobiography, which was Bone Black, I saw that the characteristics that Herline spoke, that there is a repetition of the same line, right? She repeated a certain concept in that, and that is of rage. And rage has always been termed as destructive, and this is something that bell hooks loved to do. She would take something that was possibly something that everybody would consider not so important, that everybody would actually call negative, and she turned it into something that was so beautiful and powerful. So that is one point that I wanted to bring across, that rage, the idea of rage, not in the way that African American women uh, are put down, but she takes it also, like oppositional gaze, as a tool to propel people into thinking what is the nature of rage in our lives and how do we push through our conditions or our social situations in such a manner that we can be powerful even in our rage. Another point I did want to touch upon uh, was teaching, right? The aspect of teaching that she used in her class, in the classrooms. Even the first video that Sunita ma'am shared, it was in a closed space, right? And there were perhaps scholars listening to her. But what she did was much more beyond the classroom space, as we understand, not just in her literary work, not just in academic spaces. She was very willing to speak to children. She was willing to speak to hosts, radio hosts, TV hosts. There were so many ways in which she put herself out there outside the classroom. And it was an engagement where her position was extremely revolutionary. She had positioned the revolutionary eye. She spoke that truth to power through her revolutionary love. And she will never, ever be forgotten, not just for those who were interested in African American writing, but who will continue to work on feminism, women's movement, anything related to women's identity. Her name will remain as a lasting legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. The way she puts it, feminism is for everybody, like teaching to transgress. What ideas? Classroom as a space of hope, as a space of possibilities. What ideas? How radical are these ideas? How transforming are these ideas? Yes, I agree with you that language, bell hooks' language sound look reads very lucid. It looks as if you have understood everything, but it also turns out to be very traumatic because you're also discovering yourself as you're reading bell hooks. Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much for saying that. Waiting for more responses. If there are no responses, I thank you all for joining us this evening. More power to Bell Hooks, her ideas, her writings, and more power to all of you. I hope we'll continue to meet like this and share our ideas. Before I close, I'd like to play once again a short video where Bell Hooks is speaking. But this time, I won't make the blunder of not muting myself. I was under the impression that if I mute myself, the video might be muted. So this time I'll mute myself first and then play Bell Hooks' video.
Sunita, we can't hear anything.
Is it playing, Sunita?
I began to use the phrase in my work, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, because I wanted to have some language that would actually remind us continually of the interlocking systems of domination that define our reality, and not to just have one thing be like, gender is the important issue, race is the important issue. But for me, the use of that particular jargonistic phrase was a sort of shortcut way of saying all of these things actually are functioning simultaneously at all times in our lives. And that if I really want to understand what's happening to me right now at this moment in my life as a black female of a certain age group, I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking through the lens of race. I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking through the lens of gender. I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking at how white people see me. I mean, one of the to me, an important breakthrough I felt in my work and that of others was the call to use the term white supremacy over racism, because racism in and of itself did not really allow for a discourse of colonization and decolonization, the recognition of the internalized racism within people of color. And it was always, in a sense, keeping things at the level at which whiteness and white people remained at the center of the discussion. In my classroom, I might say to students, that when we use the term white supremacy, it doesn't just evoke white people, it evokes a political world that we can all frame ourselves in relationship to. And I think that I was able to do that because I grew up, again, in racial apartheid, where there was a color caste system. So that obviously I knew that through my own experiential reality, that it wasn't just what white people do to black people that was wounding and damaging to our lives. I knew that when we went over to my grandmother's house, who looked white, who lived in a white neighborhood, and she called my sister Blackie because she was dark and her hair was nappy, and my sister would sit in a corner and cry or not want to go over there, I knew that there is some system here that is hurting this little girl, that is not directly the direct hit from the white person. And white supremacy was that term that allowed one to acknowledge our collusion with the forces of racism and imperialism. And so for me, those words were very much about the constant reminder, one, of institutional constructs, that we're not talking about personal constructs in the sense of how do you feel about me as a woman or how do you feel about me as a black person, but they really seem to me to evoke a larger apparatus. And I don't know why
those terms have become so mocked by people because, in fact, far from simplifying the issues, I think they actually, when you merge them together, really complicate the questions of freedom and justice globally, because it means then that we have to look at what black people are doing to each other in Rwanda. We have to, and we can't just say racism, what have you. We have to problematize nationalism beyond race in all kinds of ways that I think there's a tremendous reluctance, particularly in the United States, to have a more complex accounting of identity.
I would like to first thank Abhiruchi, Gurpratap, and Harleen, our students of first semester MA in Gender Studies, for sharing their readings of bell hooks in a very insightful, emotional, and soulful manner with all of us. And colleagues from University of Hyderabad, from outside University of Hyderabad, thanks for this solidarity, for joining us in our remembrance, in our reminiscence of bell hooks. Also, students, thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to more events like this where we can come together and talk particularly about people like and inspiring minds like bell hooks. As I said earlier, more power to bell hooks' writings and also more power to all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Sunita. It was a great thing, and it's wonderful to hear all of your students. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita.
Thank
It
you.
was
Thank you.
wonderful, to be
Thank you,
part of
ma'am.
this. Glad I was able to join. And it's very, very inspiring to hear the students, Made my day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sunita, your students really have got your passion. That is really
That's
good.
the best compliment, I think.
Hi,
Thank you.
Deepa.
Hi, Afifa. I just wanted to say that it brought together people from so many different disciplines, so many different domains, and I think that is the
Yes,
power of bell hooks,
Yes.
that's
that
right.
we should
Yeah.
carry it forward.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye. Thank you,
Thank you,
Gurpratap.
ma'am.
Thank you.